Good evening. Hello. Welcome. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful night. We finally have some nice weather. We have a nice lecture tonight and a nice reception, so we're so happy to see everybody. I'm Sarah Budlong. I'm the museum's Director of Development, and I am so pleased to welcome you all to our program, Sailing Through History, the remarkable journey of USCGC Eagle. Tonight we are joined by author Will Sofrin, who was last with us for this series in 2023 with his book All Hands on Deck, a modern-day high seas adventure to the far side of the world. So he's a veteran of this lecture series. Thank you for coming back. And tonight he joins us to share the remarkable story of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Eagle and reveal how the Coast Guard transformed a captured enemy vessel into a floating classroom, a diplomatic ambassador, and a national icon. If I could tell a very quick personal story, I had the wonderful experience of running an event aboard the Eagle in July 2022 when Eagle ported alongside USS Constitution, back when I was with the Constitution Museum, in the Charlestown Navy Yard. At the time, Eagle was celebrating its first female commanding officer, Captain Jessica Rozzi Oaks, and Constitution had its first female commanding officer, Commander B.J. Farrell. So it was a really extraordinary night with two female commanding officers commanding their ships next to each other on Boston Harbor. And I know that that represents just a small piece of Eagle's history, and Will has done a remarkable job capturing Eagle's journey, which he will share with us tonight, and we're excited for that. I quickly want to acknowledge tonight's sponsors, Chris's Electronics, Babbitt Chainwheel, and Burr Brothers. Sailor Series is also supported by Ruth and Hope Atkinson and the Samuel D. Rositsky Lecture Fund. So many of you are museum members, and we appreciate your membership. If you're not a member, please join today. You receive 50% off ticketed programs, so it's really worth it to join and become a member. Feel free to sign up online if you're not a member. But we are so happy you're here tonight, and right on time, let's welcome Will. Thank you so much.
Okay, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's so good to be back at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. I feel a little underdressed though, I'm very sorry. I had a nice white pressed shirt, and then my nephew this morning handed me a big dirty box, and that was the end of that, so unfortunately I'm a little underdressed. To start, you know, the funny thing about this book was, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's true, I wasn't really planning on writing this book. I was doing research for another book that I'm wrapping up, and in that book, I profile Eagle, and I reached out to Captain Jessica Rozzi Oaks, and she invited me out for a sail 2 summers ago. And so I went for a sail. I sailed from Nova Scotia to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Had a wonderful experience. And I knew about Eagle. I mean, I used to be a professional mariner. I was a sailor, and I was familiar with the Coast Guard. But really, sailing on this ship was amazing. I mean, everyone knows that my last book was about making a movie about Master and Commander, but sailing on Eagle is undoubtedly the closest you can ever get to understanding what it's like to sail on a ship during the Age of Sail, because you have a complement of almost 250 members on board the ship. It is still run by the military, so you've got the aft section of the ship where you have your grand meals, and all the sailors are eating off square trays down below in the ship. So I mean, you've got a little bit of still what used to happen 200 years ago happen today. But much better living conditions, and everyone smells a lot better because of the showers. So I had this great sail on Eagle, and I also I live in Santa Barbara, California. I'm on the board of the Maritime Museum there. I'm slated to do a talk. I'm going to speak about 2 years before the mast is to the West Coast, to what Moby Dick is to the East Coast. Great theme, right? But I get off Eagle, and I'm so excited that I call Greg Gorga, who is the director of the museum, and said, hey, Greg, I just sailed on this Coast Guard tall ship, and it's amazing, and I really want to change my subject to talk about it. And he says, well, all right, that sounds like an interesting subject. So we switch, and I do all this research, and then right around Thanksgiving, I give this talk. And it's different than what you guys are going to see tonight. But all that research that went into the talk really got me more jazzed. So a couple days later, I was speaking to a development editor, and we're just kind of making small talk, talking about what we're doing for Thanksgiving. And I mentioned I gave this talk about Eagle. And she's like, well, tell me about it. And I told her the whole thing. And she goes, well, you know, Sail 250 is going to be in 2 years. Why don't you write a book about Eagle? And I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. My agent was not too thrilled with the idea. He said, well, you know, you've got this other book that you're in contract for writing, and you'd have to deliver this manuscript in 5 months, which is not a lot of time in the literary world to do that. But I was able to pull it off. So now we've got this great book, and what I think makes this book so different than all the other books out there we can say about ships is, instead of it being a textbook of everything that this ship has done and how it was built and all these wonderful things, which are great facts, what happened was I was put in touch with the president of the Coast Guard Academy Alumni Association, Andrea Marcial, and Andrea did this call out to all the alumni, and I had all these generations of Coast Guard individuals, enlisted crew, officers, all that, all reaching out to me and telling me their stories. So tonight, I'm gonna give you guys more of facts about the ship, what the ship did, where it came from, why it's here. But the book is told through the eyes of individuals. Every chapter is a different decade of Eagle service, and it's told from the perspective of the enlisted crew members, the officers, the cadets. And through those personal experiences, you get to experience Eagle, and you get to see her evolve through the years of her service. Eagle is going to be, everybody know about Sail 250? You all know what I'm talking about? It's a big event this year, right? Looking forward to it. I'm flying to Baltimore next week to get on Eagle. I'm going to sail her into New York Harbor for 4th of July, which I'm very excited about. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do this talk, and I want to let you guys know. So this is, like anyone saw my last presentation, it's sort of like a live narrated documentary. We've got a lot of fantastic footage that a lot of people have never seen, and there's going to be parts of it where I'll pause and you'll see sort of some film and some commentary happening. But I hope you guys enjoy this, and when it's over, I'd love to do a Q&A for everyone, and let's get this going.
Secretary, members of the Congress, Mr. Superintendent, Commandant, distinguished officers, cadets. I'm not sure there are many other Americans who could climb that rigging and unfurl those sails in good times and in bad times. I think that the American people have been too long unaware of the high quality and high caliber of the cadets of the Coast Guard. And there is not anyone who has sailed any of our lakes or oceans who has not at one time or another been the beneficiary of the faithful service of the Coast Guard. This is the oldest continuous seagoing service in the United States, stretching back to the beginning of our country. So I want all of you who are cadets to know how proud we are of you, and wish you many years of service in the Coast Guard and the service of our country.
The USS Constitution is the oldest commissioned U.S. military sailing ship, but Eagle is America's oldest active duty sailing ship with an ongoing mission. Eagle is the only Coast Guard ship dedicated to training the service's future leaders and representing the United States at home and abroad. She exemplifies everything great about our nation. A positive attitude and dedication are key to creating a special learning environment where anything is possible. She's hosted 8 American presidents, numerous international dignitaries, and countless political officials. This vessel is so much more than a sail training ship. She's America's ambassador to the world. All right, Eagle is a bark, meaning she's a square-rigged sailing vessel. 2 of her masts are rigged with square sails, and her mizzen is rigged with fore and aft sails. She's 295 feet length overall, 233 feet at the waterline. She has a 19-foot beam, a 17-foot draft, displaces 1,800 tons. She has 344 tons of ballast, 6 miles of standing and running rigging, and her fore and mainmasts are 147 feet tall. She's capable of hitting 17.5 knots under sail, and she has 22,300 square feet of sail area. And she's a complement of almost 250 officers, crew, and cadets. So before we can understand why a ship like Eagle exists, we first have to understand the institution that chose her, because the Coast Guard did not grow the way other armed services did. It was assembled piece by piece as our nation grew. The story begins in 1790 in Federal Hall at Wall and Broad Street in New York City. Here in 1789, George Washington became our first president. The Bill of Rights was drafted, and Congress first met. It's also where on August 4, 1790, President Washington signed into law a new piece of legislation establishing a new maritime force. Earlier that year, in Federalist Paper number 12, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton had outlined his vision for a service that would become a pillar of the nation's economic stability and maritime security, the Revenue Cutter Service. At the time, it was the nation's only permanent armed fleet, as the Continental Navy had been disbanded after the Revolutionary War, and the U.S. Navy would not be established until 1794. In 1798, still in its infancy, the Navy was short on its vessels. 6 frigates had been commissioned, but delays left them under construction, including the USS Constitution. And so the role of the Revenue Cutter Service was expanded to wartime defense during the quasi-war with France, and again for the War of 1812. After the war, the service took on more missions, including quarantine laws and intercepting vessels suspected of carrying enslaved individuals. Through the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, the United States expanded its territory from the Pacific Northwest to Florida. Securing sovereignty across this vastly enlarged maritime domain fell largely on the Revenue Marine. The responsibilities of the service expanded in the Great Lakes again with the acquisition of California and the Gold Rush, which triggered rapid settlement, economic upheaval, and surging maritime trade well before the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. The first naval shot of the Civil War was fired by the U.S. revenue cutter Harriet Lane on April 12, 1861, during the bombardment of Fort Sumner in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Here's a letter from President Lincoln to the Secretary of the Navy asking him about placing naval vessels in control of the Revenue Service. During the Civil War, the Revenue Marine contributed significantly to the Union's success by strangling Confederate trade, cutting off access to vital weapons and supplies, and ensuring Union forces remained well equipped. Following the U.S. purchase of Alaska in 1867, federal presence in the northern region was minimal. The revenue cutters were among the first federal assets deployed to enforce U.S. laws and establish authority. As the United States continued to grow and transformation through the 19th century, so did the revenue cutter fleet as the transition from sail to steam-powered steel vessels became more widely adopted. The The introduction of icebreaking gradually expanded the service's mission beyond customs enforcement to sustaining commerce, maritime safety, and federal authority in northern waters. Come the turn of the 20th century, the service had transformed into a highly adaptable agency, adept at law enforcement, environmental protection, search and rescue, military operations, setting the stage for its eventual evolution into the modern U.S. Coast Guard. While Europe was moving toward war, Congress recognized that maintaining separate marine agencies for law enforcement and life-saving was inefficient, and merged the Revenue Cutter Service and the Life-Saving Service to create a single modern force. In 1915, President Woodrow Wilson signed the act establishing the United States Coast Guard, a name chosen because it was broad and descriptive and accurately represented the organization's missions. Come World War I, the service was transferred to the Navy and played a critical role in port security, anti-submarine warfare, and search and rescue. In doing so, it not only safeguarded the U.S. commerce and ports, but also strengthened Allied cooperation. After the war, Prohibition happened. Passed in 1919, the Volstead Act put the Coast Guard on the front lines against Prohibition. The service rapidly expanded, adding ships, personnel, and aviation to fight organized smuggling. Prohibition ended in 1933, but the Coast Guard emerged larger, more capable, and permanently transformed. The Coast Guard was placed under Navy control on November 1st, 1941, integrating fully into the U.S. naval war strategy just weeks before Pearl Harbor. During World War II, it played a major role in convoy escort, anti-submarine warfare, amphibious landings, including piloting landing craft on D-Day, and large-scale search and rescue operations across both the Atlantic and Pacific. In 1946, the Coast Guard returned to the Treasury Department, shifting from wartime operations to post-war recovery. During the Cold War, it modernized rapidly, supporting the Korean War and expanding Arctic patrols and icebreaking, adopting helicopters for search and rescue, and helping build global navigation systems like Loran. In 1967, the Coast Guard moved from the Treasury Department to the newly created Department of Transportation. It went on to play a largely unrecognized but critical role in the Vietnam War through coastal interdiction, riverine patrol, navigation support, and search and rescue operations. During the 1970s, the Coast Guard expanded its roles again in environmental protection, maritime security, and national defense, while operationalized the first global navigation system, Omega. It became the lead agency for maritime drug interdiction, enforced the new 200-mile exclusive economic zone under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and worked to reduce Cold War tensions and combat drug trafficking in the Caribbean and Gulf of America. In the 1980s, the Coast Guard expanded its international influence through Arctic and Pacific diplomacy and leadership in global maritime safety and environmental policy following major oil spills. Starting with the Gulf War, the Coast Guard supported U.S. and coalition forces through port security, maritime enforcement, and logistics. After the Cold War, it shifted toward global cooperation, working with Russia and China. On 9/11, the Coast Guard led the largest maritime evacuation in world history. In 2003, the service moved into the Department of Homeland Security. The service's humanitarian role was reaffirmed during Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010, responding at a national scale to both human and environmental crises. The Coast Guard has continued to strengthen Arctic, Indo-Pacific, and global partnerships through joint patrols, disaster response, and maritime security cooperation. Now there's so much more that we have to pack in, but we got to get back on point. We're all here to talk about Eagle, right? So if this organization is so complex and has so many responsibilities, why is the experience of training on a 90-year-old sailboat so important? Well, for one, the Coast Guard has always understood that judgment at sea cannot be taught in the classroom alone. Long before simulators, long before automation, the service relied on experiential training to instill decision-making under pressure, teamwork, and humility in the face of forces you cannot control. Eagle has become the embodiment of that philosophy. She's not a relic, she's a laboratory. And that's why her story is inseparable from the story of the Coast Guard itself. So the history of formally training cadets on the water begins on the J.C. Dobbin in May 1877. The captain had 2 lieutenants and a few petty officers. The curriculum was composed of seamanship and navigation, and the ship sailed for 5 months each year between the U.S. and Bermuda. In 1878, the Dobbin was replaced by the Salmon P. Chase, making cadet cruises in Europe, the Azores, the West Indies, and along the eastern coast of the United States. Chase's larger and modern features allowed for expanding academic instruction. Next came the Itasca, formerly used as a Navy Academy practice ship. After her U.S. Navy career, she was commissioned into the Revenue's Cutter Service from 1907 to 1915 and continued her service under the newly formed Coast Guard until 1922. When not being used as a training ship, she was assigned relief duties for other Revenue cutters. When World War I broke out in Europe in late July 1914, cruises to Europe were suspended. In their place, domestic cruises along the U.S. East Coast and Puerto Rico were introduced to help enforce the Neutrality Act of 1794 in American seaports. The next ship was the Alexander Hamilton, formerly a naval gunboat launched in 1898. She was turned over to the Coast Guard in 1922 and served as a training ship at the Coast Guard Academy until 1930. From 1930 to 1946, the Coast Guard used sail training yachts instead of large vessels. This smaller fleet was comprised of a 2-masted fishing schooner, a yacht named Chase, and the famous 3-masted schooner Atlantic. In 1939, the Danish training ship Denmark visited the United States to take part in the World's Fair. However, with the outbreak of World War II, she was ordered to stay in U.S. waters to avoid capture by German forces. The captain offered the use of the ship to the U.S., and she trained approximately 5,000 Coast Guard cadets until returning to Denmark in 1945. It was the experience with the Denmark that led to the acquisition of Eagle. The first Eagle was one of 10 Revenue cutters built after the founding of the Revenue Cutter Service. The second Eagle was a brig built in Philadelphia in 1798. The third was a schooner rig built in 1809 for the port of New Haven, Connecticut. The fourth Eagle was built in 1816 and the fifth, built in 1824, were constructed from Baltimore Clipper design. Nearly a century would pass before the Eagle name was revived, this time for a 100-foot patrol boat in a class of 13 commissioned in 1925. And here, we see the 7th and current Eagle. Now, you see the ship's wheel in this picture? Under the brass plating is her original name given by the Third Reich, the Horst Wessel. To instill the discipline and ideology of the Nazi state, the ship was one of 5 Gorkvacht-class training barks designed to train future naval officers. She was built at the Blumenvoss shipyard in 1935, preceding the construction of the famous battleship Bismarck. The ship was named after Horst Wessel, a member of the paramilitary wing of the party killed in 1930. Wessel was elevated to martyrdom by Joseph Goebbels, head of propaganda, who used his death to promote the movement. His name became synonymous with the cause, and the ship was meant to embody the strength and determination of the Third Reich. The launch ceremony was attended by top officials, including Adolf Hitler, This gave the Horst Wessel significant political symbolism beyond its role as a naval training ship. The Horst Wessel was commissioned on September 17, 1936, and began its primary function as a training ship for the German Kriegsmarine. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany faced significant naval restrictions under the Treaty of Versailles, which limited the size and capabilities of its fleet. Despite the shift to mechanized warfare, Germany preserved sail training to instill seamanship, navigation, and leadership essential to naval command. As the largest sailing ship in the German Navy, the Horst Wessel also was a floating symbol of Nazi prestige. What we're watching is an original film featuring the Gork Fock. This footage is an excellent representation of what life was like for the sailors on the Horst Wessel. It undertook training cruises in the North and Baltic Sea, building the naval skills of Germany's future officers, while also appearing in several ports, where it functioned as a tool for international diplomacy and state propaganda. At the onset of World War II in 1939, Horst Wessel remained in service with the Kriegsmarine as a training ship, while being modified to perform auxiliary roles, including coastal defense and logistical support, as wartime shortages of fuel and resources intensified. Here, we see a very interesting modification, one of the 20mm anti-aircraft guns mounted on the waist of the ship. This map depicts Horst Wessel's final passage under German flag. In April, with German refugee passengers, she sailed to Flensburg, where the captain surrendered the ship to the British. Under the Potsdam Agreement, the German fleet was divided among the victors. The names of the vessels were actually put into a hat. The Russians drew the Horst Wessel, but through some quiet deal-making, the ship was awarded to the United States in 1946 as a war reparation. The vessel was transferred to the U.S. Coast Guard, which was at the time looking for a sail training ship. Eagle's first commander, Gordon McGowan, was sent to Germany to bring her back to America. McGowan's task would be challenging. Germany was in ruins, and the ship had been stripped with all her German crew still living aboard. He stepped on board the ship and was greeted by her German captain, who's the man on the left in the photo. They walked through the ship together, which McGowan realized the task before him was much greater than he had anticipated. Here we see the original engine room deliberately modeled on a U-boat layout, allowing sailors to transition seamlessly into submarine service. McGowan had his work cut out for himself. The ship was hauled out of the water, the engine was replaced, new sails were cut as the Americans and Germans had to work together to prepare the vessel. McGowan had to be crafty when it came to sourcing materials. He recruited help from all government agencies and occasionally ended up on a wild goose chase. Now, in this lineup, you'll notice a small orphan boy, Eddie Didon, who attached himself to the Americans after Normandy. He actually tried to stow away on the ship and was offloaded before she departed. With a crew of only 50, McGowan lacked the manpower required for the voyage and was left with no choice but to deliver the newly christened Eagle to America with a combined crew of his men and Eagle's former German crew. Can you imagine? Men who'd gone to war against each other only a year ago, now standing shoulder to shoulder, having to trust each other, these former enemies. Pretty remarkable. Eagle set sail from Bremerhaven on May 14, 1946, with a crew much smaller than her original complement of 80 officers and 220 cadets. Having the Germans on board was very helpful to the Green American crew as they learned about the ship's handling and rigging, gaining the necessary skills to operate a traditional sailing vessel. The ship sailed 1,200 miles to Madeira, a Portuguese archipelago off the northwest corner of Africa. The Germans were not allowed off the ship because of local requirements. The next and uneventful leg was across the Atlantic to Bermuda. The two crews cohabitated, while many of the Germans kept mainly to themselves. Now again, in Bermuda, the German crew was not allowed off the ship due to local regulations. En route to New York, Thrown into a strengthening hurricane, McGowan fought to control the ship at 60-knot winds and mountain-high seas tore the sails to ribbons, drove Eagle to 16 knots, and reduced command to hand signals amid the roaring chaos of the open Atlantic. Upon arrival, Eagle had to moor in New York Harbor so that they could unload the German crew so they could be taken to a post-war intern camp. The next day, Eagle departed for New London, completing her voyage, arriving on July 12, 1946. Now, let's trace Eagle's service across the decades through some fascinating photos and key moments in time to highlight how her role and meaning has evolved. Eagle has many purposes, but the most important is serving as a functioning platform for the cadets to learn how to apply what they've been gaining at the academy in a practical manner. To learn how to lead, one must first learn how to follow, and this means doing everything on board. Since 1946, Eagle has served as a training ship for thousands of U.S. Coast Guard cadets, teaching seamanship, navigation, and leadership under sail. For the first 2 decades of American service, Eagle remained largely unchanged with only one major modification. The 1950 switch to a single mizzen spanker. The cadets and crew slept in 2 large compartments, just as McGowan's crew had before them. Each night, they rig up their hammocks, a task that only takes 2 minutes or 2 before climbing in. Life on board teaches everyone how to live and work together. Here, we see a photo from the 1960s of a cadet free climbing down the backstay. This is no longer allowed.
Yards braced to the wind. The Eagle heads seaward, escorted by her sleek partner, the Camden, a cutter of the Secretary class. At sea of necessity, routine is strict. Former Commandant Admiral Russell R. Weishe once told a graduating class of cadets, "Loyalty springs from the realization that there are 3 of you, all exactly alike. You, the man who gives you orders, and the man to whom you give orders. Remember that your goal strength is not to set you apart, but to pull you together into a brotherhood faced with a difficult task."
Through the 1950s and 60s, Eagle toured the Atlantic and Pacific theaters on the coast of North America. In 1952, President Harry Truman visited the ship. In 1956, Eagle made a port of call to Havana, Cuba, where the cadets spent an evening with Ernest Hemingway and his wife, Mary. In 1959, somewhere off the coast of Baja, a Coast Guard patrol boat approached Eagle so that a man in his later years could board. It was Walt Disney. Getting these pictures took a lot of work. You're the first to see them. In 1962, while in England, the Duke of Edinburgh visited the ship. The Duke was a major proponent of sail training. Later that same summer, President Kennedy and Vice President Johnson visited the ship back in America. Now, Eagle has gone through some changes over the years. On January 27, 1967, Eagle departed Coast Guard Yard at Curtis Bay, Maryland in the fog. Eagle and the motor vessel Philippine Jose Abad Santos suffered a bow-to-bow collision, resulting in major repairs. In 1964, Commandant Admiral Edwin J. Rowland commissioned the famed design Raymond Loewy to modernize the Coast Guard's image and distinguish it from the Navy. The Coast Guard service mark was created, combining a bold red diagonal stripe set at a precise 64-degree angle for visibility and decisive action, a narrow blue stripe for maritime tradition, and the central Coast Guard shield with crossed anchors and a life ring. In 1976, Eagle is the last vessel in the Coast Guard fleet to receive the racing stripe, a new figurehead, and the mizzen is restored to a split configuration. 1976 marked more than the bicentennial. It's also the year women were admitted to the Coast Guard Academy, reshaping the service and what it was doing. That change required Eagle to evolve. not just in accommodations, but in culture, expectations, and leadership. In 1976, Eagle served as America's flagship for the bicentennial, representing the nation, welcoming millions aboard during a year of reflection and celebration.
Beneath the Verrazano Bridge. The flotilla is led by the great U.S. Coast Guard ship Eagle.
At the outset, let me express my gratitude and appreciation on behalf of all the American people for everybody who had any part of making Operation Sail a success. I congratulate each and every one of you for a superb job.
The 1980s was a big decade for Eagle. In 1984, she participated in a race from Bermuda to Nova Scotia. During the race, a large weather system came through, disrupting the fleet. Eagle weathered the storm thanks to great leadership from Captain Ernst Cummings and Chief Boatswain Red Shannon. Sadly, one of her competitors, the Marquet, was lost at sea. In 1987, President Reagan directed Eagle sail to Australia to represent America during their bicentenary. Coordinating the effort took years to make happen. Here we see a picture of the crew being greeted by Australia's Prime Minister Bob Hawke. And here we see another one with them posing with Olivia Newton-John. This letter by President Ronald Reagan was read to the crew when sailing back to America. I have asked Secretary Burnley to read you this letter in an informal ceremony while Eagle is under sail, majestic and proud. Eagle sails as a symbol of our country's history and tradition and our strength. She has been, for a brief and memorable moment, entrusted to you. During your historic voyage, you have touched the hearts of people in every port of call and made us all proud. We at home watched the progress of your voyage and rejoiced in the honors that came your way. We could have had no finer representative of goodwill. While we cannot be on board, we want you to know that our thoughts are with you as the wind fills the sails, bringing you homeward. May God bless and keep you. While the Coast Guard was still underway, Eagle sailed to Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. In a moment when U.S. Navy ships could not enter the port, a Coast Guard vessel could, allowing Eagle to serve as both a diplomat and a bridge between nations. Eagle later returned to the city in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. Eagle has become an enduring symbol of U.S. maritime tradition and is used extensively for public relations, port visits, and educational missions around the world. She continues to train cadets, represent America, and host a variety of individuals. Here we see her with former Secretary of State Colin Powell. Jimmy Buffett once sailed the ship. Here he played a concert for all on board. Eagle continues to host joint international political summits. Here, we see former Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. In this photo, we see the change of command that occurred last summer when Eagle's current captain, Christopher Ensley, took command. So, what can today's cadets expect to learn? Basic seamanship, navigation, leadership, and engineering skills. In the spring and the fall, Eagle hosts over 200 officer candidates. In the summer, she hosts over 500 Coast Guard Academy cadets of all ranks. Major topics of training include damage control, engineering fundamentals, basic shipboard life, sailing fundamentals, celestial and electronic navigation, leadership, and ship handling. Now let's talk about the philosophy. Tall ship training rests on a few core principles that have remained consistent for generations of mariners and instructors. Tall ships immerse young officers into the sea itself, its routines, its hazards, and traditions in a way no classroom can reproduce. Sailor and author Alan Villers reflected after his 1954 cruise on Eagle that nothing offered a stronger starting point for life at sea. 70 years later, his point still holds. The sea teaches what no one can lecture. Tall ships generate constant practical chances for cadets to lead. Eagle is a testing laboratory where cadets are measured by endurance, teamwork, judgment, and courage. Unlike many modern cutters where leadership windows can be narrower, Eagle's structure ensures every first-class cadet takes responsibility for a division of juniors, leading to managing people while still managing themselves. For all its historic silhouette, Eagle produces modern outcomes, confidence, competence, and readiness for greater responsibility. A newer ship might reduce certain costs, but it would not duplicate the depth of training or the international stature that Eagle brings to the Coast Guard. In 2007, the Coast Guard will open a new museum in New London, Connecticut, where Eagle will be re-home ported. And this museum will ensure the legacy and story of the Coast Guard and Eagle will be told for generations. And that is the end of my talk. So, thank you. Now, are there any questions, or is it going to be an easy night? I think it's going to be an easy night. Oh?
She has her own power?
Yes, she does. Yes, she has her own
Is
power.
that added?
No, the ship always had an engine, but it's changed. I think it's on its fourth repowering since its original. Yeah. So, but I thought it was really sort of fascinating to know that she was powered by the same engine that powered a U-boat. I mean, that was just a very, very interesting statistic there, or detail.
You mentioned there were 50 Americans when they brought Horst Wessel back to the States. How were they picked?
Oh, could you say that question one more time? I forgot to repeat
This will
it.
probably help.
Sorry, yeah.
You mentioned that there were 50 Americans that helped crew the boat, the Horst Wessel back. How were they picked?
Well, I think that's tough question right there. I think, so what happened was the war was over, we were winding down, so budgets were going away, everybody was happy to sort of resume normal life. And McGowan had actually been promised a much larger complement. So I think, honestly, to tell you the truth, a lot of them were the scraps of what was available. He only went over with just a bit of a handful, then a little bit later, a few more arrived, and he had been promised, though, by the Academy that if he could have delivered the ship in time for graduation, that the Academy would have sent a bunch of cadets over, but that didn't happen. And so, let's say beggars aren't choosers, right? But something I think is worth distinguishing here is, as we all know, like there's a difference between, let's talk specifically about a Nazi and a German. And the German crew that was still working on the ship, I would say, were Germans and not Nazis. An interesting tidbit is that Hitler had all the ships in their fleet armed with a charge to detonate and scuttle the ship should they be captured. That was everyone's directive and order. And the German captain on board did not want that to happen. So near the end of the war, when he thought the moment was right, he had identified who the Nazis were amongst his crew and had the German members of his crew protect him so that he could disarm the charge so the ship couldn't be scuttled.
What's the speed she can achieve?
The question was, what's the speed that she can achieve? My understanding is she can achieve 17.5 knots under full sail, which is pretty remarkable. Yeah. All right. Oh, we have a question here.
How does she compare with other countries' training ships?
The question was, how does Eagle compare with other countries' training ships? I think, what's neat about Eagle is she's part of the Gork-Fock class, which I don't know if anyone's familiar, like I kind of touched on it, but they're called the Five Sisters, all right? There were 5 originally built, but the 5th one, the Herbert Norcus, actually was not completed because the war started. So you had these ships, and then after the war, the U.S., in addition to Eagle, got the Herbert Norcus, but what happened was we took the ship and used it, I think, in atomic bomb testing. detonated it. But her rigging and her rig had all been constructed. So after the war, Germany built what is now the fifth sister, which is the Gorkfock II, which is a replica of the first ship. And so this class of sail training ships, the other ones that have gone around the world are being used by other navies. And I think certainly larger navies, you have this bigger vessel that can do a significant amount of training with the cadets and the crew. Something here that I thought was very interesting to get pointed out that I heard Captain Ensley talking about, which was that the Coast Guard is very different from like the rest of the world or navies. Like we have a blue water navy, but most navies in the world are not blue water navies when you think about it. There's only a handful of them that are really traveling the world continuously. So I don't know if I really answered that though, did I?
Other countries have training ships.
Sir, if you could speak
yeah.
into the microphone just so we're recording as well.
Sorry.
Great, thank you.
Other countries have training ships. I was trying to contrast what we have done here with the Eagle with what other countries have done with similar endeavors.
Oh, I understand that better. I appreciate it. So what have we done that's different than other navies with their sail training? I don't think I can really speak specifically to that. I can't imagine that there's too much of a difference. I mean, the idea of taking these cadets and you put them on a sail training ship is, it's certainly not about teaching them how to sail per se. You're using this as a mechanism to teach them how to work together, how to lead, and how to endure, and probably like the most difficult format of the environment. I like to sort of say Eagle is the analog version of operating a modern cutter. So you've got to learn how to do everything by hand and manually. And the thing that these vessels do, and I think it's universal, I don't think that there's much of a difference, is that the training on board is extremely visible. Modern cutters are very broken up. You have compartments, engine rooms, bridges. You don't see each other. You have a much smaller complement of individuals. Whereas on these sail training ships, you are in front of all of each other. You can see who's pulling their weight. You can see who's slacking. You can see who's struggling. And that is sort of really important on an accountability level.
Do you have any idea how much it would cost to recreate?
The question is, do I have any idea how much it would cost to recreate that ship? I do not. I think that that would probably be a pretty scary number. I mean, that German steel is pretty remarkable. I mean, she is sailing, much of her hull is the original steel hull. Her rig is almost all entirely original. And certainly there's the conversation of what happens when Eagle's service, sort of, she ends her life. I mean, she turned 90 years old this year. That's remarkable. I mean, show me another square rig ship that's sailing as hard as Eagle is that's 90 years old. She's certainly not efficient when you think about costs of what the ship does. There's a new class of training ships that have been launched. I think Massachusetts Maritime's getting one. I don't know if they have it already, but I think the Merchant Mariner School's already got one, which they're these massive ships and they're amazing, great classrooms and opportunities to learn and really sort of practice what a modern mariner is practicing, but none of them have the prowess or allure of a ship like Eagle. And not to mention, Eagle is really the perfect size vessel for the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard is a very small branch of our service. And it is expanding and it's growing, but I don't see it outgrowing the need for Eagle. Eagle's been able to deliver what's expected of her even to this day. Well, how about we'll hold for one second. He's going to bring the microphone right over to you. Sorry.
Concerning maintenance, just curious, the boat was built, manufactured, tooled in Germany. How did the technology and sort of the methods in Germany compare to what was going on in the US? And then any sort of retrofitting, was that something where a lot of things had to be retooled? Or how did that sort of work out?
So at the end of the war, you could say that both sides, why don't we just say both sides, right, had evolved technology in certain capacities. So when McGowan went to bring Eagle back, there was a recognition that there were certain elements of German engineering that were quite advanced. An example is a gyroscope compass that they had. Like, we didn't have that kind of technology, but the Germans had. That was a big prize to bring back to America. And certainly, the quality of the materials and what they had done was at a very high level. Bringing Eagle back to America, I don't think you'd say that much was retooled, actually. Eagle remained nearly the same as she was for her first 20 years of service. Almost nothing had changed except for the change to the single spanker in the 1950s, which was reverted back in the 70s. But eventually, as her life, as she progressed through life, parts of her systems were taken out and retooled and improved. And she's gone through a couple service life extension programs that have improved her safety and modernized the ship as sort of, let's say, our standards and needs have grown and changed. For example, below, she used to be this giant, just open ship, and now she's broken up into compartments. More ballast was added to the ship. She has air conditioning and all modern systems that one would expect today. Nobody's sleeping on hammocks anymore, which I thought was really actually kind of funny, because in the 1960s, there was a lot of great nomenclature in this. And if you guys read the book, again, like we go to the 60s, and I guess the hammocks had like this thin little mattress that all the crew called fart sacks. And there's a lot of that terminology through the book where you kind of take that Coast Guard slang and drop it in whenever you can. Yes?
So I'd like to know how you got yourself a ride on the Eagle.
The question was, how did I get myself a ride on the Eagle? So does anyone here know D. O'Regan, editor of Sea History? Anybody read Sea History? Wonderful, right? It's a great periodical. If you don't, subscribe to it, please do it. It's a wonderful, wonderful, cause and organization. Anyways, I had told Dee that I was working on my next book, which is the one that was supposed to be the next book, but now it's the one I'm finishing because this one got in front. And the book I'm wrapping up questions, it profiles the state of our education in America and puts focus on experience. And so I was looking for places where there's experiential opportunities. And Dee had said to me, she said, well, the Coast Guard is an excellent example of that, because that's what the Eagle is. You have the cadets, going through the academy during the year, and they have to sail on Eagle, and Eagle is their first opportunity to start to apply the knowledge that they've been gaining in the classroom. Because, what's important is, certainly acquiring knowledge, but what we need to figure out how to convert that knowledge to competence. And that's through experience. So Dee put me in touch with Jessica Rossi Oakes, who was Eagle's last commanding officer, and she invited me out for a sail. And then, then I got the bug, and so last year I got invited out again, and then how could I say no to Sail 250 this year going into New York Harbor? So there you have it. Any more questions? We've got one up in the back there.
I didn't know if you realized that the revenue cutter, Salmon Chase, which was one of the first cutters in the revenue service, was stationed right over here on Fish Island in New Bedford. And they had a school of instruction there. And if you trace the history of the Coast Guard Academy, it'll come back to Fish Island in New Bedford.
I'm happy to say I do, and like in the book goes a lot more into depth in that specifically. So yes, that's a wonderful bit of history because it does, tie to New Bedford. All right, I've got one right here.
With one of the stated goals of training aboard the Eagle being paper and electronic navigation, how is it involved in a head-on collision?
So Curtis Bay, Maryland is where Eagle goes for her yard work, for extended periods. And when when Eagle's not training, she goes down to a reduced crew. And at that time too, Eagle, this is a great leading question, which is, I believe it was not until 1976 that Eagle had her first year-round assigned commander. So Eagle was just sort of a summer school all the way up through the 60s. And it was the responsibility of the cadets at the academy in the spring and the fall to put her back together and then break her down. And so my assumption would be that we certainly had a different level of navigation technology in the mid-60s. And also, you probably were down to a skeleton crew and just different standards and different operations. I feel confident that that would not happen again today, but all right, are we good? I think so, huh? Well, thank you everyone for coming to see me tonight. Really appreciate it.